Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of our podcast RNV Talks, in which we will be discussing many different aspects of the history and culture of the Roma minority. This podcast is released as a part of the project EUROMIJA, arranged by the Roma National Council of Croatia in the framework of the European Solidarity Corps. Today is the 2nd of August, the day of remembrance of the victims of Porajmos, and we would like to pay tribute to them with this episode.
One of the biggest tragedies in the history of humanity took place during the Second World War, when millions of people were murdered in concentration camps by the Axis power and other collaborationist governments, like the Ustaša one in Croatia. The systematic elimination of millions of Jews, Roma, people with disabilities, homosexuals, political dissidents, Poles, Serbs, and prisoners of war was an unprecedented case in history. Hence, there was a need for new legal frameworks suitable for these crimes and to punish those who committed them adequately. The first step in this direction was the establishment of the International Military Tribunals of Nuremberg in Germany and Tokyo in Japan, to prosecute the crimes committed by the Axis powers during the war. These tribunals went further than their originally declared scope by contributing largely to the formation of a whole new branch of international law called International Criminal Law. International criminal law ensures justice to victims of serious international crimes and promotes peace and security through the accountability of criminals and the deterrence of future crimes. However, since this branch of law was almost completely new, experts had to begin by deciding which crimes were included in its framework. International criminal law identifies 4 core crimes: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and aggression. All 4 of them are important, but here I will only focus on genocide. Before the Second World War, the concept of genocide did not exist, because none of the atrocities committed in wartime before 1939 were even slightly comparable to the extermination of people committed by the Nazis and their allied forces. There was not even a word to describe this kind of crime, and the word genocide was created by a Polish lawyer, Raphael Lemkin, in 1943 or 44 by combining the Greek word for people, genos, and the Latin suffix for to kill, side. He was strongly connected to this crime, as several members of his family were murdered as well. Lyomkin's contribution was fundamental to write the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, adopted by the United Nations in 1948. The convention defines genocide as any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, as such. Examples include killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Even if this definition may seem straightforward, there are often debates over whether a particular crime should amount to genocide or not, because this label is overwhelmingly powerful. Therefore, experts are very careful when evaluating if a genocidal crime is at place or not, and there cannot be any genocide without proving that the destruction of a group is intentional. Yet, it is very difficult to prove that intent is there, making these debates often very intricate.
The genocide of the Roma people during World War II, often called the Porajmos, meaning the devouring or destruction in the Romani language, was a tragic and systematic attempt by Nazi Germany and its collaborators to exterminate the Roma population across Europe. Despite being one of the largest ethnic groups targeted by the Nazis, the suffering of the Roma has historically been overshadowed and less recognized than other genocides. Historians estimate that between 220,000 and 500,000 Roma were murdered, which was a devastating portion of their population at the time. Unfortunately, precise numbers remain uncertain due to incomplete records and the long-standing marginalization of Roma voices in historical accounts. The persecution of Roma was based on racist ideology that viewed them as racially inferior and a threat to social order. Roma were subjected to forced sterilizations, deportations, and imprisonment in ghettos and concentration camps throughout Nazi-occupied Europe. In many countries, Roma were rounded up simply because of their ethnicity, often without any legal grounds or due process. Families were torn apart, men, women, and children were deported to extermination camps, forced to live in appalling conditions, and systematically killed. The genocide also included widespread acts of violence outside of the camps, mass shootings, torture, starvation, and medical experiments. Entire communities were destroyed and cultural traditions severely disrupted. The Porajmos has long been called the Forgotten Holocaust because for decades it received little attention in history books, memorials, or education system. This erasure contributed to ongoing discrimination and prejudice against Roma communities even after the war. In the territory of what is today Croatia, under the fascist Ustaša regime of the independent state in Croatia, Roma people were brutally persecuted alongside Jews and Serbs. The Jasenovac concentration camp was one of the most notorious sites of this genocide. Here, entire Roma families were deported. Men, women, children, and elderly alike, subjected to forced labor, starvation, torture, and mass executions.
August 2nd marks the anniversary of a horrific event at Auschwitz-Birkenau. On the night of August 2nd till 3rd, 1944, the Nazis liquidated the Gypsy family camp, a special section of the camp where Roma and Sinti people were held. Despite fierce resistance, mostly women, children, and the elderly were murdered in the gas chambers. This date is now commemorated as European Roma Holocaust Memorial Day to honor the memory of the many thousands Roma and Sinti people who were victims to the genocide carried out by the Nazi regime.
Jasenovac is located on the border of the territories of present-day Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. It consisted of several camps units established within the period from August 1941 until January 1942. Camp 1, Krapje, Camp 2, Bročice, Camp 3, Ciglana, and War Group Kožara. One more unit, Camp 5, was located not in Jasenovac but in Stara Gradiška. The location for the concentration camp wasn't chosen by chance. The proximity of railway lines for transporting prisoners, the presence of a river also used to get rid of bodies, and swamps to complicate the possibility of escape played a role. Jasenovac is a site of genocide committed against Serbs, Roma, and Jews. Today, a museum, memorial centers, and mass graves are located on the site of the infamous place.
It is important to have a memorial place like Jasenovac, so we don't forget the horrors that happen in history because history is the most important teacher.
In this place, the contrast between the tranquility and beauty of nature today and the horror of the events of the past, which reminded only in the photographs in the museum, is striking. The ringing silence outside and the storm of emotions inside, that's the state you are in this place.
The outside part of the camp had no translations, not in English, not in any language. There were foreign people visiting the camps that could not even understand what they were watching. As if the history here is only meant for a few to understand, as if this horror, this pain should not cross borders. It's a strange kind of remembering, one that whispers instead of speaks. The narrative is there, but in a low voice, like saying, yes, we acknowledge this happened, but let's not talk too loud, let's not disturb too much.
At the Jasenovac Memorial Museum, I read the stories of young lives cut short, kids forced to live in camps who tried to find a glimpse of normality in creating tiny drawings on their notebooks, and of couples who were divided forever, and of lives haunted by loneliness and fear.
One of the scariest exhibits of the museum for me were the drawings of the youngest prisoners of the concentration camp. The stories behind them come to life in interviews with survivors and witnesses of these events shown in the museum. The numbers of Roma children killed in the camp are horrifying, and the Nazi separatist forces did not spare anyone.
I had never visited a concentration camp before, and I felt overwhelmed by horror, sorrow, grief, and sadness. Visiting Jasenovac also made me reflect on the fact that conflicts did not stop after the Second World War. Racism is still present, some groups are still victims of persecutions and mass killings because of their religion, or skin color, or ethnicity. I could not believe that nobody could be saved from that atrocity, that even children were basically sentenced to death simply because their existence was a threat.
Strangely enough, the book of reviews has become an unexpectedly significant component of the museum for me. Obviously, the existence of a place like Jasenovac in the past is not only the tragedy for this region, but I was amazed at how much this pain resonates with people from all over the world. The words of memory of those tortured in the walls of the concentration camp and expressions of hope that such events will never happen again are written in dozens of languages. Visiting Jasenovac is quite a difficult emotional experience, but it's very important because we cannot ignore the fact that such places existed in the past and the events that took place here. The voices of those tortured and killed behind the walls of the concentration camp will never be heard again, but their story must be told.
Their dedication is a way of honoring every life and every name, because oblivion is the most popular weapon.
It is important also to remember that killing and tortures like this didn't happen only in Jasenovac, but in many places in the world in different times, and is still happening in front of our eyes. We should be aware and resistant.
Recognizing and remembering the Romani genocide is essential, not only to honor the victims, but also to raise awareness about the consequences of racism, discrimination, and hate. It reminds us of the need to fight against anti-Gypsyism and promote human rights for all, ensuring that such atrocities never happen again.
We live in a world in which we like to think that war is a thing of the past, but in reality it is not. International law tries to put some order in our societies, but it cannot change the mind of those who still believe that some groups are superior and deserve to live more than others. And even worse, so many victims are just anonymous bodies, deprived not just of their lives, but even of their identity. It is the case for many Roma people who remain unidentified, forever erased because we cannot even call them by their name. I believe that if more people visited places like Jasenovac, nobody would even dare to celebrate these regimes. Unfortunately, it is easier to forget and to allow a new cycle of violence and hatred to emerge in the future. That is why it is important to remember and to pay homage to the victims of this horror, because we can all become members of a targeted group, somewhere, somehow, just because of who we are.